Have we got any more hellos, Elizabeth? There's quite a few people joining us now.
Yes, I've noticed a number of people who've joined us from the US. So welcome everybody, all those who are joining us from abroad. Really, really exciting to have you join the session today, and also looking forward to your contribution in the chat box.
So welcome everybody. Welcome to our weekly wellbeing webinars. And today we're going to be focusing on improving psychological safety during times of rapid change. Hello, my name is Zoe Lord, and I'm also very much looking forward to this session about how do we improve psychological safety, how do we build teams, and how do we build effective teams on the fly. We've got some fantastic speakers today. We've got Amy Edmondson, we've got Helen Bevan, and we've got Sonia Wallbank. And we would also like to hear from you too. So please do join the conversation via the chat box. So whether you are in Zoom or you're with us in YouTube as well, please do add to the chat box, and we'll be pulling comments out of those during the session today. So we've got some aims. These are our usual aims for our weekly Wednesday sessions. We want to offer support, ideas, knowledge and wisdom to those who are supporting others in health and care. We want to share with you a range of national wellbeing offers, which Sonia's going to do today. And we want to connect with each other. So please do use that chat box.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Nyawade, and I will be co-facilitating with Zoe. So welcome to today's session. On our agenda today, we will get our usual update on what's going on nationally, the national initiatives, and we will hear that from Dr. Sonia Wallbank. And then we'll hear from Professor Amy Edmondson, teaming to create our new future. And followed on by that, we will have Helen Bevan leading in a conversation with Professor Amy Edmondson. And as usual, we will end with a call to action and some closing remarks. And on the team today, you've already met me and Zoe. We are your facilitators. Our contributors, we have Dr. Sonia Wallbank, Professor Amy Edmondson, and Dr. Helen Bevan. On the technical hosts behind the scenes, supporting all the great session today, we've got Paul, Zara, Claire, and Tej. Welcome. On the chat box, our facilitators today, we've got Louise and Karen. Welcome. And on the social media, tweeting throughout the session today, we've got Lee. And on the YouTube, we've got Ian and Selena. Thank you. And I'm now going to introduce Dr. Sonia Wallbank. Dr. Sonia Wallbank is our Health and Wellbeing Clinical Lead for NHS England and NHS Improvement. All the initiatives we have available to us have been developed by Dr. Sonia and her team. So thank you, Sonia and team. And we're now going to hear about what's been happening nationally and where we are. Welcome, Sonia.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Great to be back again. I know that all of our NHS England and Improvement people teams are watching avidly today to see how their work is featuring. So welcome to colleagues as well. Just to share with you initially, so you are probably familiar by now with the support offer that is in place, but I wanted to update you on how people are using it. So in terms of our listening line, and our text line, we've had over 2,000 conversations now on the phone line, and as expected, as we start to see the activity slow down in relation to COVID, we are hoping that increases. With mental health awareness next week, we are going to be doing lots of press campaign and just inviting people to really think about reflecting on their own mental health. I read a really interesting paper this week actually about health and well-being, not just a state of being neutral, but actually well health. How well do you feel as a result of going through the experiences that you have through COVID, and where might you be getting that support from. So it's not necessarily the national support that you might need. It might just be talking to somebody in your team, but please do take that from somebody. Nearly 1,000 text conversations we've had now. So this is the text line where you just text frontline and you start a conversation with a human being. And I think that's a really great service. We've had some really positive feedback on that. And then we've got our bereavement line where you can have up to 3 sessions with a qualified counsellor. And we've got a particular Filipino nursing arm of that as well. So if you are a Filipino Tagalog speaker and you're looking for specific support, just give that number a call and let them know, and they will get you a call back. So over 110,000 downloads of the apps, the free apps, and again 100,000 visits to the website. So please do keep popping back into the website, because we can't work quickly enough for you. So this week what went up there, which was great, was to how to have conversations about COVID, especially from a key worker perspective, to help reassure children. We know that through previous pandemics, one of the casualties is families, really. How do you start a difficult conversation about what COVID means? And especially if you're a key worker, perhaps putting yourself in danger every day as a child may see it, having those conversations early on is really important. Our common rooms, our safe spaces have opened up, and they're now being utilised. And we've got a number coming on stream for specific groups. So if you've got an idea about a common room that you might like to see opened for your team or a specific element of your workforce, please do let us know, because we really do want to respond and adapt the service that we're offering, and really here to listen to that. Just to re-emphasize that those spaces are confidential, they're not linked in any way to a particular employer. So come along and find out for yourself. Shall we go over to the next slide? Thank you. So I just wanted to share with you some thinking that we've been doing. So if, like me, before this virus hit, you were frantically working on the people plan or getting the people plan out, we know that that was delayed. But that doesn't mean to say that the thinking around this has been delayed, because actually what we've learned through COVID and the health and wellbeing response is how important that people plan is going to be to our recovery stage. We're expecting the full plan to come out in the autumn, but we're really doing some thinking around what does having an effective, healthy and safe working environment mean post-COVID? What will we need to have in place for people to continue to thrive? I don't know about you, but I have seen so much positive practice going on out there in the system, and we want to continue through those people plan discussions to have national conversations, from car parking through to hot meals, through to recognising the need for staff to decompress. We really want to see those things continue, but obviously we're working within a frame. We need to prioritise where that work needs to be. So we just want to keep making sure that health and wellbeing stays at the top of our agenda. You'll see my other picture there is a slide that is the leadership and team functions that we've got on the website. One of our key priorities is psychological safety. I repeat that mantra of our key resilience lies in our teams, both in the relationships we have with each other, the relationships we have between teams. If like me, there have been times, dark times, that we've had over these last few weeks, and it's not just been my team members, but people from other teams checking in with me, checking that I'm okay. That experience to be able to speak up when things are not going well, to be able to ask and reach out for support is critical for us in the recovery stage. and how we function together as teams was particularly why we wanted to have this conversation with Amy and colleagues today. We are offering peer support training. So Neil Greenberg, who you may remember from one of our first webinars, he's got a great military model called React. That's going to be up and running in the next couple of weeks. And we're working also with the Point of Care Foundation on a brief team time intervention that's using the evidence base from the Schwartz rounds, but bringing that into a virtual kind of quicker version. Again, working on that team safe space. So lots going on. Just one ask from me. So whether it's on Twitter or Sonia with a y.woolbank@nhs.net, I'd love you to get in touch if you've used any of the service offers. We're interested in pulling together some evaluation experiences through the national programme so we can learn about how that's been for you. So love you to get in touch. And again, just to prompt out, so the @people._NHS Twitter account and our main website will all become versions of the People Plan as we move forward, and health and wellbeing becomes the People Promise and the People Plan. So keep a watch out on that site for updates. Thanks very much. Back to you then. I think it's you, Zoe.
It is, yes. Thanks, Sonia. And yet again, so many practical offers that are available to our health and care staff. So please do go and have a look at the website. I've downloaded apps myself and found them really, really valuable. So before I hand over to Amy, I'd like to find out a little bit about you and how your world is changing and your team, and how the changes have affected your team. So we're going to put a poll up in a moment, and I'd like you to share with us on the poll if you're in Zoom, or through the chat box if you're in YouTube. What is your experience? So what changes has your team experienced since the onset of the pandemic? So number one is no changes in team members or workload. Number two, I can see the answers coming in very quickly. Number two, same team members but heavier workload. Number three, major changes in team members but no change in workload. And number four, major changes in team members and a heavier workload. So please do share those with us in the poll if you're in Zoom. If you can't see the poll, then please do answer in the chat box, and we'll be having a little look at the answers as well in YouTube. So we'll just have a few more moments on the poll. And at the moment, I can see 51% are number two, same team members, but heavier workload. And the next one, which is currently at 32%, is number four, which is major changes in team members and a heavier workload. So, Paul, if we could share the results from that, that would be fantastic. And yeah, so we can see the results there. So the majority are same team members, but heavier workload. And then the next one is major changes in team and heavier workload, which is interesting. And no doubt, Amy, you will share your thoughts on that in just a moment. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amy Edmondson, Professor Amy Edmondson. I'm sure many of you will know Amy for her groundbreaking work on psychological safety and teaming. She's the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, and also knows a lot about us, about health and care. So Amy came over in June last year, and with the help of Novartis, Amy will be working with NHS Horizons and a number of organisations to help us with looking at psychological safety and how we can improve it in the future as well. So without further ado, welcome, Amy, and we're delighted to hear about teaming to create a new future.
Thank you, Zoe. It's really an honor to be here. Let me just go ahead and share my slides with you, and say yes. And I'd love to put this in context. And yes, thank you, Novartis, for my chair and for making this session possible as well. It's just been a delight teaming with all of you to design and develop this session. And yes, I hope this first slide conveys a sense of hope or cheerfulness with its bright colors, that we are. It will be ultimately up to us to team up to create a new future, but it's truly an unknown future. And why teaming? Because we will talk about psychological safety as well, but why the emphasis on teaming? And I think anytime you're trying to rebuild and reinvent or look at the future, an unknown future in some way, teamwork simply comes with the territory. You know this. You can't be an expert on everything. Your future success will rely on pulling together multiple sources of expertise in an effective way. That's vital. I like to make a distinction between teams, and it looked from the survey responses that many of you, if not most of you, have, or at least the majority of the dominant response, you're in your same teams. So we call those teams. Those are reasonably well-bounded, reasonably stable groups of people who get to know each other. And that is a real gift. You get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. You begin to be able to coordinate almost effortlessly, although in healthcare there are always surprises and always challenges. But let me define teaming as teamwork on the fly, as coordinating and collaborating often with different people at different times. And those of you in the fourth, responding to the third and fourth poll question, we're essentially saying, I'm teaming with new people right now. And on the one hand, it's a wonderful opportunity to learn new things and meet new people, make new collegial friendships. But on the other hand, it's challenging. You're missing what I call the luxury of stable team structures. But teaming, I will argue, is especially called for in a crisis. Now, if you'll forgive me, when we were preparing this session, I couldn't help thinking about the sort of some classic management notions. Now, I did notice from the poll of who's actually here today that if you add up line management and OD professionals, at least 40% of you are deeply immersed in management thinking and management training. And then a very large portion were other too. So we'll have to ask more about that. This, I hope, will resonate, but this idea that we need to team, we need to break down those silos, even in healthcare, maybe especially in healthcare, to do anything that's truly amazing. I know that day in and day out, the work you're doing is far more amazing than fish and chips. And forgive me if I have offended anybody with that culinary point. But this is in management thinking, kind of classic management thinking. We talk about the S curve that all organizations, like it or not, go through. And all startups, have this lively, experimental, teamy work at the beginning. And eventually they figure it out, and then they get into kind of some reasonably well-run, well-designed company states that deliver on that value proposition in a reliable and efficient way. And then eventually, phase 3, that runs out of steam. Now, the point of the model, why the model is interesting to people like me, is that it shows us there's 2 danger points. There's the risk of never making it. Most startups fail, 90% according to some estimates. So there's the risk of never making it out of phase 1. But there's another risk that is more paid attention to, which is the risk of not noticing that it's time to change, not noticing that it's time to make major changes. Much of the work in management thinking is about figuring out how to help people get from phase 2 to phase 3. That is seen as a very risky sort of place. Now, I want to focus your attention in the midst of the pandemic on phase 1 to phase 2. Now, normally the way you get from phase 1 to phase 2 is you're experimenting vigorously and broadly and openly to find out what works and what doesn't work. And you're sharing your successes and your failures, and you're documenting what's working and what isn't. Okay, that's a team sport. Both of these, in fact, are team sports. So let me take this back to the pandemic. So the thing I've been keeping myself up at night with recently is that so much of healthcare delivery, I think at the NHS and in the United States today, is kind of stuck in phase 1 of delivering care in the pandemic. And by that, I mean, it's got the classic signs of phase 1, which are long hours, almost impossible willingness to be heroic and to do what it takes, but it ultimately isn't sustainable. Ultimately, to get to phase 2 of care in the pandemic, we need to figure out some ways to streamline, to share what's working and what's not working. Again, a team sport, which is why I think teaming is so vitally important right now, and so non-trivial, right? So this is one of my favorite cartoons, and I think it speaks to us right now in the midst of all that is going on. We never know when we are ignoring some brilliant idea because it's coming from another silo. And one of the most powerful forces to ignoring those ideas and therefore failing to get from phase 1 to phase 2 is the notion that we're too busy. And we are, I get it. Simply too busy, but don't be too busy to look up and find a better way to do things. So I said management thinking. Management thinking is kind of captured on this slide as the old-fashioned prescribed control. We know what the future looks like, simple interdependencies. It's all about efficiency. We agree what good looks like. We absolutely can't tolerate any failures along the way. A hierarchy is a way of keeping that all in check. I think you can readily recognize that this logic fails us utterly in a crisis. What we need instead is innovation logic, where we're enabling and learning and experimenting. We not only assume, we remind ourselves on a daily basis of how much uncertainty we face. The interdependencies are complex, not known in advance. We've got to try stuff. Yes, we are coping with multiple shifting criteria. Smart failure, more on that later, is essential, and we're relying on each other. So the advice to stay in your own lane doesn't work. We're utterly dependent on cross-silo sharing. So I have thought a lot about this over the years, especially recently. How do you help people do this? How do you help people not make the mistake in that cartoon, missing the wheels? And just a few overarching, for those of you who are line managers and OD professionals especially, what can you do? And oddly, I think it does again start with and come back to never stop calling attention to why the work you're doing is so very important. Now you might think, why do we have to do that? It's patently clear. It's obvious. I would argue it may be obvious intellectually, but not emotionally. And we human beings need to be reminded, brought back to the worthiness of what we're doing to sort of stay cooperative and stay open-minded. Keep being explicit that diverse perspectives are a resource. They're frustrating at times, but they are a resource for shared problem solving in support of that purpose. And then finally, be deliberate in creating opportunities in the midst of getting work done to build understanding and empathy as part of teaming to get to get the work done. But let's get more granular, right? Let's get more practical here. I think the elements of effective teaming, which I understand you are doing right now, day in and day out, but they're basically twofold, right? There's the hardware and the software. And the hardware is sort of simple management stuff, if you will, but with a twist. It's setting out tentatively where we're going, what do we have to work with, and most importantly, clarifying the interfaces. I said that interdependencies are complex. It's in part because they're shifting as we go, but the most important thing to effective teaming from the hardware side is being clear about where our different tasks intersect so that we're on top of it. Right? So got to clarify the places that require us to coordinate and free us up to do our work elsewhere, right? So don't make the mistake of thinking everything has to be teamy. There are things, thankfully, that you can each do alone going forward. So getting clear about those areas and then prioritize what we call reciprocal tasks, those tasks that require us to talk back and forth in order to figure out what to do. Those have to be, we have to be very clear about the scheduling and making sure we know when they're coming along. And yet the hardware is absolutely without a blueprint. It's a mindset. I think what fundamentally the teaming is a mindset, agile, collaborative, and iterative. While, as you do now, you face many unknowns. You're bringing in different experts at different times. They don't always have a absolutely clear blueprint of deliverables or roles. Every one of you, I suspect, is required these days to do new things that haven't been done before, which means oftentimes, like it or not, you have to try something without perfect clarity about what will work. And this means, alas, there will be failure along the way. Smart failure, meaning we did our best. We had a hypothesis, we tried it. Most of the time it works. Every now and then it doesn't. The only thing I can say is learn fast. So now to the software, and I have to admit, this is my home base. This is where I am most comfortable and have done the most work. And again, I speak to purpose, but let me emphasize psychological safety. I want to make the very clear point that if people don't feel their voice is welcome, if they don't feel they can fully participate, your teaming is at risk. So the software is what's at stake, again, making it safe for people to speak up and keep modeling and reinforcing empathy for what others are up against, what they see, what they worry about. And let me just jump right in to emphasize psychological safety a little bit. And I want to define it clearly, right? This isn't everything. I'll tell you some of the things it isn't in a moment, but it is a belief that your workplace is safe for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, and yes, even failures. Confident that your voice will be valued. If you like, you can think of it as a sense of permission for candor, that this is a place where I can just say it directly, and that will help the patients, that will help my colleagues, that will help all of us. So just a few things that I've noticed over the years people have gotten confused about with this construct. Psychological safety is not being nice. In fact, in too many workplaces, being nice means I'm not going to tell you what I really think because that wouldn't be nice. So it's not synonymous with psychological safety. It's not freedom from conflict. In fact, as you can readily recognize, it means we may, in fact, find ourselves engaging in having more conflict because of the directness, because of sharing our different views. It's not a guarantee that everything you share will be applauded, will be just fantastic in the eyes of your colleagues. I'm sorry about that. It's not permission to slack off, certainly not, and certainly not in this crisis if there ever was a problem. And it's not a license to whine, it's not oversharing, and it's not the goal. What's the goal? The goal is quality care. The goal is taking care of each other. The goal is innovation, you name it. And psychological safety enables it, but isn't the end state in its own right. And in fact, to bring it back to the crisis, I would argue that urgency is not something that you as leaders need to do a whole lot to reinforce. Everybody knows we're in a state of urgency. Everybody knows that the time is of the essence, and that taking action quickly matters. But psychological safety, I will argue, without it, you can't get to where you need to go, whether that's the phase 2 of this crisis or just the small day-to-day problems we're trying to solve along the way. And this points to 4 types of workplaces. One where we're neither urgent nor safe. I don't think we need to go there, but that's the apathy zone. This is where people quit and stay. You know, they're still coming to work, but that's about it. And yes, if all you worried about was psychological safety, you might be at risk of creating what we call the comfort zone. But I don't think that's a very big risk today, if it ever was. Here's the one that I do believe is a risk, and I'm going to name it the interpersonal anxiety zone. To be clear, that it's not about anxiety about the virus. You should be anxious about the virus. It's an anxiety-producing thing, but you cannot be. You must not be. You must help people not be anxious about each other, about what other people think of you, in a way that leads you to hold back your voice. Your voice is needed. And when both psychological safety and urgency are high, that's what I call the problem-solving zone, right? That's where we need to be to team effectively, to get ourselves to that next phase, something a bit more manageable through innovation, and to create that future that we so desperately want and need. And just 3 quick tips on what can you do to build more psychological safety at the NHS today. I will argue that even though it says leaders at the top of this slide, that doesn't mean, sometimes that conjures up an idea of leaders up here at the top of some hierarchy. Not at all. That's leaders all the way through the organization. That's leaders at the sharp end of care. That's leaders of projects. That's leaders in back office. That's leaders everywhere who can do these things to help us feel more candid, more able to share our voice at work. And they are 3 simple things. Now, simple is not a synonym, as you well know, for easy, but I think they are, in fact, simple. And framing the work means every day, routinely, make sure people know that you know and understand the context of the complex, uncertain, novel, interdependent world in which we live, and why that requires your voice. Inviting engagement means, having set that stage by framing the work, you still have to go out of your way to ask good questions, the kind of questions that people can't resist answering. They must answer them because you've given them that opportunity to share their thinking about something specific. And then finally, of course, responding in a productive way, in a way that always welcomes the messenger, even when the message is unwelcome, and that promotes people looking forward. How can I help? What should we do next? What ideas do you have? For simplicity, I think this is really a leadership stance, a modeling for all of you of humility about what lies ahead of the reality we face, a curiosity about what do others bring, and empathy for what we are and what others are up against. Now, let's I have one final slide to share with you, and sort of picking up on this leadership theme and going beyond just psychological safety. And actually 2 slides, sorry. This, I just want to point out that psychological safety, because many people have been asking me during the pandemic whether psychological safety has likely plummeted in workplaces, and maybe in particular in healthcare. And in some that is true because frontline caregivers are getting the message that those above them don't want to hear the bad news, and they don't want to hear when they don't have enough personal protective equipment and so forth. Those I hope are rare. But I want to make the very clear distinction here that a lack of psychological safety, which is subtle, it's not visible. If someone on your team is holding back an idea or a concern or a mistake, you can't see it, right? It's the act of not speaking up is not a visible act. It's lonely, it's experienced alone. It's fundamentally concerned with what do others think of me? And of course, it inhibits innovation. So fortunately, and maybe this is a bit of a silver lining, fear related to COVID-19 is obvious. It's explicit. We're allowed to talk about it. We're talking a lot about it. In fact, it's a shared experience. And it's fundamentally a fear that is concerned with what can we do. And when harnessed, it's a fear that helps us promote innovation because we're in it together. So the extent to which the people you're working with, and so many of you are with your same teams and some of you are with new teams, if you felt more comfortable than usual expressing your concerns and your questions, one question that I would love us to think more about is, how do we keep that alive? How do we keep that transparency and vulnerability alive into the future? And so now my last slide, again, in this overarching emphasis on management logic falling short in a crisis. I have observed that people who are trained in management, who think fluently in management, will instinctively do some of the following things. Facing immense uncertainty, as you all are, wait for more information to make a decision or to act. Downplay bad news because it makes people feel better, and you want them to feel better and feel engaged, and when things go wrong, which as I said they will and do, to kind of be defensive and to maybe double down and explain your actions more clearly, and then this sense of good leadership as staying the course, through thick or thin, whereas I would argue that what's needed today is instead acting quickly in the face of imperfect information and seeing what happens, communicating with immense transparency, taking smart risks and focusing on learning fast, and then engaging in a constant updating process. There is some old-fashioned and very simple advice that at least weighs in here, which is that a leader's job, and again at all levels, is to paint reality for people, and then somehow not lose hope, right? To sort of keep emphasizing we can do this together. When we put our minds to it, we can do this, we will do this. I have complete confidence. So let me stop here and open it up. I know that there are questions coming in, and I'm certainly eager to engage with Helen in talking about them.
Yeah. Amy, thank you so much. And I can see from the chat box, just how much the things that you've said have touched and connected with our audience. So what I'd like to do, I just want to give notice to our colleagues that are looking after the chat box. Okay, I'm going to ask our colleagues in the chat box to pick a question each. So Louise, Karen, Ian and Selena, would you like to pick a question each? And if you look for that while I'm asking you the first question, Amy. So I think what's really interesting, or one of the things that's really interesting that you talked about there was, there are some principles, specifically in during the COVID pandemic, and there are things that we should be doing them all the time. And one of the things for us in the National Health Service in England is as Sonia mentioned earlier, we're going to have, we're having an NHS People Plan. And one of the things the NHS People Plan does is it sets out a whole set of promises to our 1.4 million people. So, you know, what promise do we make to you, being an employee, somebody who you know is part of our NHS people, and some of the things that are going to be part of the promise are, for instance, a positive, inclusive and compassionate working culture, an effective, healthy and safe working environment, you know, recognition and reward for your contribution. So, you know, I just wanted to ask you to kind of give us some advice, you know, as we implement the people plan and we try and make it happen everywhere for all our people, okay, what are some of the things that we need to do to make that real, taking account of the things that you've been saying to us?
You know, I would add, I mean, maybe these are temporary promises, but maybe not. I think I would add two to the list. And one is, we promise, we will be doing the very best we can. Of course, you have to live up to that promise, but it's the old intentions are invisible and impact is very visible. Right? So people will oftentimes feel that things are happening that hurt them or don't feel right, and our brains will instantly assume that meant you didn't care, you know, and when quite the opposite is true. So it's we will be doing the very best we can is kind of one, and then two, we will be listening, right? So we know we're going to get things wrong, but we will be listening. We need and value your help, your input. And so, you know, but the broader picture of, I think those are wrappers. That's a wrapper to put on what your promises already are. But the broader picture is, we have to, you know, forgive us, but we have to forgive each other, because this is challenging, unprecedented. It's going to be iterative. And by the way, we can't put these promises in place for you. Again, we need your help.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think that's really really good advice. So can I just call on, first of all, can I call on Louise? Louise, would you like to pick out a question from the chat box and tell us who asked it?
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you very much, Amy. There's a lot of great feedback in the chat box and people really liking the concept of smart failure. So thank you very much for that. A question that's come up a few times, so we've got it from Zoe, Daniel, Joe and others. Apologies, I've missed you from the chat that's coming through, but a lot of discussion around command and control and how the command and control structures that we often put in place, particularly in times of crisis, how that fits with the concept of teaming.
Great. You know, the major distinction, let me do that one first, which is the major distinction between, because it's absolutely right that in a crisis we do need to look coherently for instruction, for guidelines, and for boundaries, you know, for rules. The major distinction here is that in the old-fashioned Weberian hierarchy, the boss is the boss because he, and I'll use that pronoun, knows more, and therefore has authority over us simply because of the role that he's occupying. Now, today, I would argue the boss is are things like protocols and guidelines and agreements that we have made and stick to and you know and must stick to about how we will work together, as opposed to that authority living in the body of a human being who just has power over. Right? I think, and so the kind of control structure we need in a crisis is one which is, you know, brilliantly clear on communication, you know, daily updates, new do not do's or new do's every so often. But we don't, nobody has the right to have you do something that doesn't feel right simply because they say so, if that makes sense. So it's you know, in the military setting, the team of teams concept kind of replaced the old top down, because we need order, we need control, but we recognize it takes too long to travel up the hierarchy and travel back out. We got to have these kind of empowered teams in places that are communicating and coordinating across barriers to get things done. And one small thing about smart failure is really almost a synonym for smart experimenting. So it's and probably the most important thing to say about it is really what it means is smart hypothesizing, and then willingness to test with an open mind.
Yeah. What a wonderful concept. Thank you, Amy, for that. And let's ask Karen now. Karen, have you picked a question?
You're muted, Karen.
Yeah. You're still muted. Yeah. Can we unmute Karen?
She might be muted.
Yeah, no, she's good. Yeah. Hi, Karen.
Hi, thanks. Lots of great questions coming through. Quite early on, we had some questions about the complexities of working in the virtual space and teaming. So Harpreet and Joe were just talking about any tips or guidance about teaming, working virtually.
To me, it's the hardware and the software on Technicolor. Right? So that it's the same advice, but more explicit, more frequent, more heavy-handed, which sounds funny, but I really do mean it, right? So when we need to check in with each other in a way, in the workplace, I can kind of glance over the cubicle wall and see that you're busy right now. When I'm looking at you in a tiny little screen on my tiny little screen, I need to be explicit in checking in. How are you? How are you doing? Is this a good time? And so the hardware is that sort of dynamic scoping and sorting and structuring. And then the software is, again, inviting your voice, showing empathy, and reminding us of why we're doing this, because it's hard.
Wow. Thank you. And Ian, can you hear me? Can we unmute Ian? So I think, are you and Selena going to talk? It's a joint question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've the chat box is lit up a couple of times in the YouTube live broadcast. I think particularly around the teaming on the fly and that concept, that certainly rang true for Catherine, who's been teaming on the fly with the bringing back staff element. She's found it both challenging and exhilarating. But I guess the question that's probably been posed comes really from Cheryl. And Cheryl says that she often feels a strong sense of psychological safety within her team and her organisation. But given the size and scale of the organisation with 5,000 people, she's conscious that not everyone feels psychologically safe.
Yes.
So I guess the question that then flows is, how do we make others feel psychologically safe if we're feeling safe ourselves?
That's a great, lovely question. And I first want to clarify that the questioner's experience is, she's very astute, because it's in every organization, healthcare and otherwise, that I've studied, psychological safety varies across groups, right? So your group might have it, but some other group might not. That's normal. And what does that say? Well, what that says to us is that means that leadership in the middle may be as, and I would even go far as to say more important than leadership at the top, right? It's these unit managers and team leaders and initiative managers that are shaping the climate for voice. Okay, so that's a natural observation. Now, what do you do? And I'm gonna go back to that same framework, which is you, wherever you stand, can help someone somewhere else by framing the work. In other words, reminding them of what we're up against. It's complex and uncertain and volatile and challenging. Wow, right? That means your voice matters to me. Then more explicitly asking a question, what are you thinking about this patient or about this initiative or about this promise? And I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then listening intently and responding in a thoughtful way. So the reality is you can't change the whole organization from where you sit, but you can do things that change every encounter you have. And I promise you that makes a difference. It makes a difference in the small that is contagious and goes further. So just show up, be curious, be humble about the shared challenges ahead, and show some empathy for what people are up against.
Thank you, Amy. And next one is from me that I've picked out. Again, just having a quick look through the chat box, there's a lot of people asking questions about virtual working and remote and dispersed teams. So how do we do teams and teaming in a virtual environment, and how do we ensure psychological safety in a virtual environment?
Number one, recognize that it's hard and you don't know at the outset whether it's present, right? So it's almost assume it may not be present, but assume you can do something about that. And anytime you ask a genuine question, which you just did right now, right? You asked me a genuine question. I feel respected and safe to respond because you have said to me, I want to hear what you have to say about this. I promise you, anytime any one of you is asking a genuine question of a colleague, you are creating at least maybe momentary, but a momentary safe space. You can do that through Zoom. We just did, but you must do it. I think we're all feeling that busyness, that pressure, and it leads us to just think we better get going. And by the way, you probably want to get off anyway, so I'm just going to go right to it. But don't sacrifice inquiry with all the advocacy you want to do. So do more asking than telling.
Great. I think if we all thought about that and we all said, actually I'm going to shift my ratio of asking to telling, I think we'd move forward a lot. And we're coming to the end of that session. It's gone so quickly, but I just have a final question for you, Amy. Just to give you a kind of opportunity to reflect on anything you've heard or you've seen. I mean, what final piece of advice would you give to all of us as people that support the well-being of NHS people and people in partner organisations? What are your kind of final shots of wisdom to us all?
Well, I don't know that it feels like a daunting prospect to offer wisdom to you because you are living it, day in and day out, in the trenches, on the wards, making it happen. I really would just want to admire your courage and your commitment to this important work. And perhaps the advice then is do not lose sight of how very powerful you are in influencing someone else's space of psychological safety. You really have much more power than you think, so practice it wisely.
Yeah, wonderful advice. And I think if we if all of us so I think that there are well over 600 of us across the two systems today, and I know that some people are in joint groups as well. So if every one of us took that power, like you say, that we have, what a difference we can make. So Amy, thank you so much. And again, if anybody would like to add some reflections into the chat box, what you've taken, perspective, that would be fantastic. And Amy, we look forward to seeing you with us so much more in the National Health Service in England, and helping us to build our systems, to do great teaming and our psychological safety, which means that we can make an even bigger difference. We look forward to that very much. So yeah, and back to our facilitators.
A really packed session there. Thank you all very much. As usual, we usually come to you to find out how you found today's session. So I'm going to ask Paul to put on the next slide when you're ready. Yeah. The question we have for you today, and it's one we've always had in these sessions, is to find out from you to what extent you found today's session useful. It is important for us to listen to you and to take on board your feedback. So I'm just going to invite you to participate in the poll that is running now. Just give you a few more moments before we close the poll. Yeah, Paul, can you close the poll and share with us the findings? Excellent. Majority of you, 62%, found this session very helpful. Thank you all very much for sharing that feedback with us. And we have 26 on finding the session helpful. So thank you very much for that. And as usual, if I can have the next slide, please. We also usually end these sessions with a call to action. If you can close the poll. Yeah, right. So can you please share with us in the chat box one practical action that you're going to take away from today's session, something you're going to put into use either for yourself or for your colleagues, please. We always like to hear from you. Just take a minute or two, a few seconds there to just share that with us.
Yes, so we've got, they're moving so quickly to read them, but lots of people are saying they're just going to take a little space, a little bit of reflective space to think about what they can do. We've got Ruth saying ask more questions, Patricia saying listen more. We've got it's going so quick. I'm sure you can see it as well. It's going so fast to read them.
It is. I think the one that sticks with me, a number of people have said, I will take time to listen. Others have just put it to be vulnerable, to listen. A lot of it is around listening to others, which is great.
And humble inquiry. So I'm going to come to Sonia, Helen and Amy for a couple of final sort of thoughts. Maybe you might want to share what you're going to do after this session. I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your next steps? So I'll do this in order of Sonia, Amy and Helen.
I really like the idea that intention is invisible and impact is visible. I love the idea of being open and authentic with people, but also asking for their help. We can't do this alone. You know, the people plan and all of its intentions are amazing, but we need everybody to gather behind us and put some of this into action. So that's my call today is, you know, join us, help us, let's get this right.
Thanks, Sonia. Amy, would you like to share a few other words?
Well, I wish I could roll up my sleeves and be more helpful with all of you, but I just want to thank you for the honor of inviting me to be a part of this.
And thank you for sharing with us. I mean, my reflections are that I'm just going to reflect a little bit more on what we've learned today and see what that means for me as an individual, but also what does that mean for our team as well, our Horizons team. Helen, over to you. You're just on mute, Helen, but I can unmute you.
So my reflection today is you've just muted me.
You're unmuted.
So my reflection about today is, you know, my world has changed to a virtual working world, and I think that just really reflecting on what Amy was saying, you know, I think that so much of the way that we're doing virtual meetings, particularly large scale ones, is we're broadcasting and we're talking at people. We're doing a lot of talking, and I think we have to build in space for a lot more listening, and it makes me want to think about you know, how we're going to manage to do that.
Thanks, Helen. So as we close this session today, thank you so much for joining us. I would like to learn about our next session. So every Wednesday we have these wellbeing sessions, and next Wednesday we're going to be talking about applying principles for psychological support to maintain wellbeing and enhance recovery during and beyond COVID-19. And we're going to be learning from the Ebola crisis as well. So if you'd like to join us, we've got Idit, Nick, Alan and Sonia will be joining us as well for this session. So please do join us on there. Join us on Twitter as well. We've got the hashtag caring for, that's the number 4, caring for NHS people. and are NHS people. You can go back to the Horizons website where you found this link today. And we've also got a platform, a newly launched platform called Tribe, which we'll put in both chat boxes, the link to those. And that's where you can share your resources, you can ask questions, and you can help each other with your key topics and you know, your questions, your topics, things you're working on, things you're proud of. You can share that on the Tribe website. So from myself and Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.